Friends, as we are making our journey through the Beatitudes, I hope you see that these are more than just poetic verse that fit on a keychain or a bookmark. These are the true values of Jesus about giving ourselves completely over to God, about understanding what it means to invest deeply and to love deeply, and of course, thinking what it means to have a balanced life. I mean, these are all so very important. So I want you to get your Bibles as we continue and turn to Matthew chapter 5, verse 6. This next beatitude says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." That's a declarative statement, by the way, which all of the beatitudes are declarative. Jesus says, for those who live this part, this other part is assured. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Now, I don't know about you. My family are not foodies. Some of my children are, but my wife and I were not foodies. We cooked food in order to keep people alive. Now, I have friends who are foodies, and I enjoy going with them, but, our main deal was to cook what we needed. I remember when our children were young, they would come in and they would say, "Oh, Dad, when are we going to eat? I'm starving." And I would think to myself, are you really starving? But I've said that too. I remember saying it to my mother, and I think my mother told this exact story about me when we would say, "I am starving." Well, there aren't many people who are really starving in the communities where we live. We do have a problem with homelessness and with hunger, and usually it is those who are the most under-resourced in our communities. And I'm always shocked by the amount of food that we throw away in the United States. But that's for another study. In this particular study, this passage is talking about hungering and thirsting. And when we think about hunger, Jesus is trying to make a very specific point. Now, he's talking more than just about the hunger that my children would come in and tell me, or that I would tell my mom when I was younger. We were not starving. But the word that Jesus uses is to specifically talk about that kind of starving. It's not the hunger because we don't have enough. It's the hunger because we don't have any. Now, when I would play golf, I would usually have to play 36 or 54 holes during a day. And I can remember coming in and I would be very thirsty. And there were probably times that I was underhydrated. But you know what? Even if I said I am thirsty, that's not even to the point of what Jesus means when he's talking about thirst in this passage. Just like when he's talking about hunger, he's talking about the kind of thirst that happens when your organs are about to shut down, when you don't have anything, you are completely dehydrated, and you have to have water for life. So think about these two types of expressions. The hunger is when your body starts to ache, that kind of hunger when you don't have anything to eat, and you're willing to search and do what you can to find it. And the kind of thirst where your organs are going to shut down. It's a life and death issue if you don't find the kind of refreshment that you need. Jesus is talking about something that most of us don't understand. And here he's talking about a hunger and a thirst that causes us to make decisions about how we're going to prioritize our life. Because if you're truly hungry in that way, or you're truly thirsty, friends, you're not going to do your taxes first. You're going to go find some food. You're going to go find something to drink, because that's where you are in life. And those are the words that Jesus uses in the Greek for hunger and thirst. Now, what is he saying that we're hungering and thirsting for? Well, he uses the word righteousness, and I've found that most of us think we know what righteousness means. But the word that Jesus uses for righteousness is from a Greek word that is defined as simply living God's way. But there's a little caveat to it. The way that this word would have been translated in the Hebrew meant that you had to, in order to live God's way, would mean to walk with God, or to walk with God's holiness, literally. In order to be righteous, what Jesus is talking about we should hunger and thirst for, make a priority in our life, that kind of hunger and thirst for that kind of righteousness means we have to walk intensely, not just intently, but intensely with God. We have to build our proximity close to him so that as we are walking with a holy God, God's holy ways begin to define our life. I remember the story of a couple that came to see me for counseling many years ago, Sam and Gail. Sam himself was a counselor. Sam and Gail met when Sam was doing his residency at the local campus clinic where Gail showed up because she was having some anxiety about her own school program. And while they were in there, one of the other clients had a breakdown, and the client got very upset and basically scared everybody in the room, and Sam went out to take care of it, and he had to restrain the man. And the only move he knew to restrain someone was straight out of some of the wrestling moves that he had watched on television as a child. He really shouldn't have done it. He should have waited on someone else more trained, but they were worried that the man really may hurt someone. Well, that was the first time that he met Gail, because after the man got, to where he needed to be, he made sure everybody in the room was okay, and that's when he noticed Gail, and that she was this beautiful redheaded woman, and he just fell madly in love with her. And they had a couple of things in common. Now, he was kind of reserved, and Gail was the outspoken, sort of outgoing one. But they loved certain priorities and values in life, and they started off their marriage, and even though they were opposites, they attracted. And they had a great start to their life. And they both were ambitious about the things they did for a living. But over the course of time, over the course of having children, over the course of priorities and directions and decisions, they ultimately saw that their paths led in different directions. Their covenant led apart from each other, and therefore the covenant began to die. They began to hunger and thirst in their relationship, but they made no priority to feed what was needed for their healthy relationship to be sustained. And as they came to see me, I was expecting this to be a fairly simple conversation about maybe doing some things to help them get to know each other again and to appreciate each other and to talk and communicate the basic things that happen whenever someone comes to a marriage and family therapist. But in the middle of the conversation, Gail tells Sam that she had had an affair. And I remember looking at Sam's face because it was the one thing that he did not expect. But as we began to talk about it, he maybe had not expected it, but he began to understand it. Because when two people who are bound in covenant are led apart from each other, what happens is that they begin to lose that connection. They begin to lose that sense of priority for one another. And eventually they had led to places where they were basically living two very different lives. I remember asking Sam at one of our sessions, what do you want from this relationship? And he said, with all the feelings and images, I don't know if I can live with this. And that's when I asked him, you know what? Sometimes, Sam, we get to places where it's not what we can live with, but it's what we can't live without. Jesus is telling us that we should not live without real righteousness and holiness in our lives. In fact, it should be such a priority to us that we should hunger and thirst for righteousness the way a hungry man seeks after food to stop the ache in his body, and the way a thirsty man will seek after water to help his organs to be healthy, to come back from this life and death intersection. That's how we should be seeking, and why we should be seeking relationship with God. But for many of us, our relationship with God is very similar to what happened with Sam and Gail. Eventually, we find ourselves walking in two different directions, and we forget what it means to hear the voice, but more than just to hear the voice of God, to truly feel God's presence in our lives. In this beatitude, friends, Jesus wants something more than for us to just hear his words. He wants us to seek him with everything. Kind of like the first beatitude suggested, he wants us to be completely destitute in spirit so that the more that's open in us, the more that God can fill in us. Most of the time, hunger and thirst are used in the Bible literally in what's called the genitive case. And I want you to listen to this. In the genitive case in the Greek, when hunger or thirst are used, it usually means they hunger for a piece of the bread, or they hunger for a cup of the water that's in the bucket. That's literally how that case would be translated. But that's not how Jesus uses hunger and thirst. He uses it in the declarative mode, where basically, again, you're hungering and thirsting because it's a life-threatening, a life-defining decision and priority. This changes everything for us, and it should change the direction in which we're going. One of the most difficult periods or seasons of my family's life is when we lived not far from the Mississippi Gulf Coast during the impact of Hurricane Katrina. And I remember a friend that was out in one of the worst hit places just north of I-10 on the Mississippi coast, getting a call from a woman in Wyoming. She was a young mom of 3 small children, but she had been watching the news, and she had decided that she was going to come and help, and she had found this man's church's name in some list. So she called and said, "We're coming down." And he said, "Oh, that's wonderful," because he had not gotten a lot of the attention that some of the other places in the impact zones had gotten. And he asked her, he said, "Well, how many people do you have?" And she said, "Right now it's just me, but I'm coming." And his heart kind of sank, because he thought to himself, I need more than just you. By the time he picked up the team at the airport, she had 26 people that she had convinced. And he had not talked to her in quite some time, so he didn't know she was going to have that many people. And they stayed in that community for 2 weeks, and they made an incredible difference. As he would talk to the people who came on the team, he would ask them the question, "Why in the world did you make this trip?" And the answer was always the same. Because your friend, the woman who organized it, we couldn't say no to her hunger to help your community. And she changed their lives. You know, we're built to crave. If you think about it, our bodies, our lungs crave air, our bodies crave food and water, our souls crave love, our spirits crave connection. We're built to crave. So I want you to spend some time in your reflection groups asking the question, what are you craving? Are you craving things that lead you in directions apart from God? Are you craving things that fill you up in ways that the world never can? Remember what it says in Matthew 6:33. Seek ye first, crave first the kingdom of God.